Come to some findings and opinions and conclusions within that report?
Yes, I did.
And are those findings, opinions, and conclusions based upon a reasonable degree of scientific certainty in the field of optometry and vision science?
Yes.
May I approach the witness, Judge?
Of course.
Sir, showing you what has been previously marked as Defendant's Exhibit AA through GG, could you just take a moment, take a look at those, and see if you recognize what they are?
Yes, I do.
Are those photographs that you previously viewed in connection with this case?
Yes.
And are they photographs that you are demonstrative examples of things that are in your report?
Yes.
Showing you what has been previously marked as Defendant's Exhibit W through Z, may I show you these photographs, sir? Can you identify those for me, sir?
Those are photographs that I produced from videotape showing various states of illumination that would have occurred during the incident in question.
And do you reference those photographs within your report?
Yes.
Doctor, I'm going to leave those there with you, and as we go through your report, if you have something that you feel is necessary to demonstrate to the court, and you notify me of the exhibit number, we'll have it up on the board.
Thank you.
Did you also provide us with some demonstrative charts and or diagrams?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And same thing with those. We get to a point in your testimony that you feel that that demonstrative diagram or chart would be helpful to the court. Will you alert me, and we'll put it up here on the board?
Yes.
Doctor, have you been to the Heritage Middle School in East Cleveland, Ohio?
Yes, I have.
And when did you visit the school?
Last evening.
Okay. And were there any demonstrative examples for your review while we were out?
Yes, there were.
And what were those, sir?
There were two police units with light bars that were positioned in the position where units 217, 238 were positioned, and another car was, civilian car was put in the position of where the Malibu would have been.
And did you have a sufficient opportunity to view that scene last evening?
Yes, I did.
And was that helpful in your analysis of this case?
Yes, it was.
And doctor, was that done in the dark or the light?
That was done during hours of darkness.
About 10 o'clock or so?
Yes.
PM, right?
Yes.
All right, doctor.
Objection, Judge, not in his report.
Well, that is true, but I have a feeling that's the last question on that subject.
It is.
So the objection came after the answer, but that objection is likely to be overruled if more questions are asked on the subject. I guess is the way I'm sorry, that objection is likely to be sustained if more questions are asked on the subject.
Understood, Your Honor. Doctor, could we step back and just basically talk about what is an eye and what is vision?
The sensory modality of vision is mediated through the eyeballs, and that's all we have. We have two sensory organs, slightly larger than a table grape, that focuses light, converts light into neurological impulses, and sends them back to the brain. And under a very narrow set of circumstances, human vision can be very good and very reliable. But on many other set of circumstances, human vision is fallible because of limitations anatomically and physiologically to the eye.
Sir, could you just explain briefly how the eye works?
The eye is a light-gathering and focusing device that has nothing in its capabilities to pull anything out of the environment. The eye is a passive device that's dependent on the lighting and the circumstances of lighting in the environment. But given that energies of light that enter the eyes called photons, P-H-O-T-S, P-H-O-T-O-S, I don't know in there. And it converts them through a neurological process into perception of three distinct colors, and sends that via nerve impulses back to the brain. And there's a lot of information from the physical environment that can be lost in this process, and the brain takes expectation, memory, and past experience to form a present percept of reality in the present.
Let me just slow you down there for a moment. You talk about these receptors to the brain.
Yes, receptors, the photoreceptors that are in the retina, the nervous tissue of the eye.
Okay. And are there several types of receptors?
There are three primary colors.
Could you describe to the judge how that works?
There's red, green, and blue receptors. Given those three colors in various degrees, every color that we perceive can be fabricated by a combination of those receptors. We have more green receptors than we have any other color receptors in the eye. And then we also have receptors that do not perceive color. They only react to shades of gray, and we call these rods. They function under the lower levels of lighting, much relevant to this case. They don't provide color perception, and they don't provide fine detail.
What is a cone?
A cone is a color receptor, as I previously said, red, green, or blue. They require high quantities of light to fire, and they also gives us detail. What we're seeing in this courtroom right now is primarily cone vision, because we have high levels of light, we can see detail, and we can see color. If the lights were down, we just had a couple of candles on in this room, and it was otherwise dark, we would have rod vision, color other than in the shades of gray.
Are there things environmentally that can affect our vision?
Yes.
And when they affect our vision, I think you began to say that the eye can be a fallible sensory organ?
Yes.
Okay. Could you explain that for the court?
Well, a lot of what we perceive is, we can't perceive everything with our eyes that's out there. So the brain uses memory, past experience, expectation to fill in the holes in our experience. This is why, for example, if you go to what's called an illusionist, somebody who's Penn and Teller type thing, all they have to do is distract you for one moment, and they can do many other things that make you perceive that you saw one thing when in fact something else had occurred.
You mean they don't really saw the lady in half?
Not that I know of.
Or the birds turn into a pretty girl?
All we have to do is to draw your attention momentarily away from the main point of interest, and one can be deceived.
Okay. Environmental things may affect vision, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And that can be obviously the amount of light present?
Yes.
Do things such as strobe lights affect our vision?
They would have a great deal of relevancy in this case to understand the visual environment for the defendant when he was functioning at the end of this pursuit.
And can you explain the effect of strobe lighting on our vision?
There is a lack of vision that occurs because of lack of light. There is also a lack of vision that occurs because of too much light, so-called being blinded by the glare. A veiling glare, such as with a flash strobes that are a part of a light bar on a police car. On one hand, they provide a very useful function in that they grab the attention of the motoring public while driving during hours of darkness. But for somebody in the position of Officer Brelo, it represented a grievous handicap to his vision.
I'm not sure. I haven't scrutinized the report. Is that objected because he hasn't expressed his opinion before?
He expressed his opinion, but not they said that he just said
You didn't use the word grievous.
Overall.
Can I back you up? Just in general, you use the term veiling glare. Could you explain that, not particular to this case, but just in general first for the court?
A veiling glare could be referred to as being blinded by the light. It's something that we see the effect of if you're driving at night in a rural area and you have a deer in the road who gets blinded by the light. You see the response that his visual system is overwhelmed by the headlights of the car and is actually blinded by a higher degree of light than to which he was adapted. We experience this when somebody takes our picture with a flash attachment, that we see a bright light, and then afterwards we see a green afterglow. The reason we see green is because the majority or a disproportionate number of photoreceptors in the eye are for the color green. So when the bright light hits the eye, adjacent cells are suppressed, and immediately after they fire. And that's why we have a false image afterwards of an after image when somebody takes a flash attachment picture. And when there's in the case of the strobe, it is a constant, steady set of after images that happen after being blinded by the glare.
Okay. Could you explain for the court this effect of the rolling light bar from red to white to blue and back on vision?
The constant set of lights, in the case of modern light bars, they don't mechanically roll anymore. They are electronically rotated. And the constant flood of those lights into the eye creates blindness instantaneously, and then thereafter would be an after image, which really doesn't get a chance to manifest itself because the one light that just went off is replaced by another light adjacent to it. And these are in rapid succession to each other.
Would this be analogous to going from a lighted environment to an unlighted environment and back and forth very rapidly?
Yes, and the relevance is that we adapt to different levels of lighting. Light adaptation occurs very rapidly. Dark adaptation goes through a curve that takes up to 40 minutes, although most of it occurs within 10 minutes. So, comparatively speaking, we adapt to a lighter environment rapidly and a darker environment more slowly.
Would that be, for example, why a pirate wears a patch and switches it from eye to eye?
Because of the necessity in their line of work that they had noticed they're going underneath, they're going into the dark of the invaded ship, that they would have one eye patch so it would start dark adapting, even though they were in daylight, and then when going underneath the deck, they could flip the patch up and have adequate dark vision.
Again, going from light to dark and back and forth.
Correct.
And again, that effect with the stroboscopic lights or the police light bars.
Yes, but the police light are going to give a veiling glare. It's not just going to be daylight vision. It's going to be a blinding glare.
Can you talk to us, Doctor, about the concept of peripheral vision?
Well, our vision is what we perceive as good vision is only top dead center in our vision. And I give you the analogy as you're looking at me and I'm looking at you. We generally have a pretty good impression that I'm getting a pretty good view of everything behind you and around you, and that's an illusion. I can see you because I'm looking top dead center with an area that is called the fovea. The fovea is an area that is very, very small and has 100% cones in it, and is where we have our best resolution for vision. In the periphery, our periphery is actually very blurry and doesn't perceive color, and I can give you an example of that that's easy to show under these circumstances. I'd ask you to stare at my finger, and don't take your eyes off my fingernail, just stare at it. And you're a pretty good impression that everything is clear up here. But I ask you, while you're still staring at my fingernail, can you read the seal of the state of Ohio above the judge's desk?
I don't think I'm allowed to answer.
Okay, but the answer is you can't. But your brain, from past experience, you've learned and you've seen in the past when you've moved your eyes or crossed and seen that, but when you're staring perfectly still at a center point, you experience that your peripheral vision is not valid or reliable. All you can do is detect movement and shades of contrast. I have on the zip drive, I have a diagram that was taken from an ophthalmology text. So if you go to that number 2, well, let's go to number 1. No, that's, go back. There's no one, that one right there. This is a diagram from an ophthalmology text. It's basically just showing what I described, that in the central vision there's details of perception, color perception, and object identification. Now that's 5 degrees radius. That's rather small. And then the rest of the eye is peripheral vision, which is mediated by the rod receptors, and it's shapes, perception, shades of gray, and movement detection. So really, other than something being top dead center in your vision, you lose the clarity. This is why if you're slightly misaligned while you're firing a rifle, you miss the target entirely, whereas you otherwise might have been able to be in the bullseye. And we could go back to the other picture that you had. This is with both eyes open, shows that you have out of one eye 5 degrees top dead center that you could actually be able to read text. So if it's not top dead center in the center of your vision when you're reading a book, if you were reading just a little bit above the line that you're seeing, you would not be able to see standard book print. And out 15 degrees or so, you see shape, and somewhere between 30 and 60 degrees out from top dead center, we lose the perception of color, which I had addressed earlier.
Doctor, you're familiar with sighting a weapon?
Yes.
And can you explain for the court what we mean when we use that term?
Well, in order to sight a rifle, something of that nature, looking at a target, one must align not only the sights of the weapon, but also align it with the fovea. There has to be a straight line from the target through the sights to the fovea of the eye in order for somebody to be able to perform with the weapon. And then there's the other factor that comes in if we're talking about sighting a handgun.
Okay. Would you indicate to us what happens when one sights a handgun?
Okay, these points are for what we call pre-presbyopic folks, people who would be under age 40 who don't wear bifocals.
Okay.
Bifocals accomplish the same thing. We just have to make some accommodations as eye doctors for people who have more maturity than somebody under the age of 39, 40 years old. The eye can only focus at one point at once. You cannot focus more than one point. If you go back to the analogy of staring at your thumb, if you stare at your thumb, everything further away from you is blurry because the point of focus is at your thumb. Well, when firing a handgun with standard sights on it, the point where one focuses is on the front blade of the sight. And everything further away from that, you're perceiving it as if you were a nearsighted person.
Do you have a demonstrative example of that?
I believe that if we can go back to if we go to the bottom one right there. Let's look at the incorrect one, and that's the one furthest on the left. You see that the target is clear, but if the target is clear like that, the person who's firing the weapon is going to miss the target because his sights aren't aligned. And if you look at the rear sights only is in the middle picture, you're also going to miss the target because you're not pointing the front sight at the target. The one that would be at the moment that one fires and is going to be able to hit the target is the last one where the front sight is clear, the sights to the rear are slightly blurry, and the target is blurry. So at the moment that one pulls the trigger on a duty weapon like this, the target is actually out of focus optically because it has to be focused on the front sight. The further one is away from the target, the more blurry it is.
Okay. Doctor, we're speaking individually of different things that affect one's vision. What is a muzzle flash?
Muzzle flash is an illumination that is created by burning gases when the cartridge is fired.
Do you have an exhibit there that shows examples of muzzle flash?
Yes, I do.
Which one would you
Well,
tell me where to go?
let's go to AA, AA. Well, excuse me, I'm sorry. Let's go to GG. And also HH.
Okay. What do we see in HH, Doctor? Let's go GG first. I apologize.
GG. This is a photograph of a man discharging a duty weapon with duty ammunition from the Cleveland Police Department. And he's firing one round, and you can see that at the end is what we call the red donut. And this happens so quickly that the brain does not remember that it happens. It's not a part of our memory, although it does affect our line of sight and occurs between the sight and the target. So if somebody is firing in rapid succession during hours of darkness, there is going to be pretty much a constant glow of red burning gases at the end of the muzzle between the target, along the line of sights, to the intended target.
And what effect does that have on the person's shooting ability to see beyond the end of the...
It obscures it.
And you go to the next... to GG, I think. HH, I'm sorry.
And that again is mostly the red glare. You could see a little bit of the line from where the hot copper that's scratched against the barrel is leaving as that curved line. But the main point here is the escaping burning gases from the muzzle blast.
Does the environment into which somebody's looking have an effect on their ability to perceive?
Yes.
Again, individually, not collectively, looking into a windshield, how does our vision react on that? A clean, pristine windshield.
Well, depending on the incidence of the light, you can get reflections off of the light. And when light hits a surface, such as a windshield,
Overruled.
when light hits a surface such as a windshield, it is either reflected, absorbed, or transmitted. And so some of the light is going to be lost going through another medium, such as leaving air
Overruled.
and going into a glass windshield. And that's under the assumption that it's not a cracked or damaged windshield, which it was in this case.
What is the effect of one's vision when looking into a cracked windshield?
Well, specifically with this windshield and the photographs that I've seen, when a bullet enters the windshield, not only is there that area knocked out of the glass, there's what's called contradial fractures, which are the circumferential white, milky color cracks around the bullet wound. And in the periphery, there's what's called hackle marks. And these are small areas that diffract light that would be going into the damaged glass area. So it would be an obstruction to the view and the quality of the view above and beyond what happens looking into a darkened environment. From a relatively more lighted view from outside the car to a darker environment inside the car.
If you know, just talked about a bullet going through the glass, does that have any impact on the integrity of the glass itself?
The question began with "if you know," so that's fine.
As far as the visual image is concerned, or?
Well, I'll ask somebody else that question.
Okay.
I apologize for going beyond your area. And obviously the number of cracks are going to increase what you've described, correct?
That is correct.
What is a saccade?
A saccade is a specific type of eye movement that the eye performs to compensate for our limited field of view. That we have a small area in our visual field that we can actually see color perception and detail. So a saccade is a rapid eye movement that involves the 6 extraocular muscles outside the eye, and is the reason that literally the hand is quicker than the eye, because there's a latency period before a person can make a saccadic eye movement.
So could you explain that, how the hand is quicker than the eye?
Is that there is a insignificant amount of time that is the latency period for striated muscle movement, such as when we move our arms. We can move very quickly. But to move the eye, saccadic eye movements have to have the central 5 degrees, have to follow a specific target, whether it's we're reading letters in a line on a book, or if we're watching things in the environment. But the neurological process takes up to a quarter of a second, most of them about a 1/10 of a second, before the eye actually starts moving. And then when the eye is moving, there is suppression of vision. This is why we don't see the smear or the retinal image as we look around the room and go from one image to another. When the brain initiates the movement, there is the suppression of vision. When it's random movement, such as you would have if you were reading a book in a car, you would not have that suppression, and that's the reason why one experiences car sickness when they're in the car, because they're seeing that smeared image, because the brain doesn't know it's coming to suppress it.
So we see something, and by the time we can react to it,
A lot of times it's over and the eye has to move to another position. So it's a series of saccadic eye movements trying to keep up with something. For example, studies have shown that somebody, a suspect, even a novice, can pull a gun from a position of concealment and fire it in 6/10 of a second.
and it would take the person viewing that how long to perceive that from what they saw in their eye to get their hand
Objection.
to reach for their.
The studies done at Smith & Wesson and at the University of Minnesota School of Law Enforcement said it takes 1.5 seconds for an officer to see what is happening, respond, retrieve his weapon, and fire. So almost 3 times the amount of time is needed to react to it as it is for it to happen.
Just want to go back. I neglected to go through this exhibit with the muzzle flash. That is, did you identify that? I'm sorry. Aye.
Yes.
Okay. Could you just, is there anything in that exhibit that you would comment upon regarding the muzzle flash?
That
From
was
angle?
a sequence of rounds being fired.
And again, the effect of that on one's vision?
Is that there's a constant red ring between the fovea of the eye of the shooter through the sights and on the way to the intended target. And this is something that's visible during hours of darkness. I'd say is not present during daylight hours.
With your expertise in optometry and vision sciences and perceptual psychology, could noise have an effect on our vision?
Noise is one of the sensory perceptions that's integrated into our present appreciation of reality at the moment.
Okay. Now, we've talked about a number of these things individually. Does a prolonged pursuit play any role in our vision?
Yes.
And what role does that play?
Well, because of the high stress, the release of adrenaline, norepinephrine, and endorphins in the brain, that fatigue is a predictable result of this activity, and that with the imminent fear, produces an individual who's pretty well worn out by the time that this incident came to unfold in the parking lot.
Would you, sir, go through the remaining exhibits and tell me the significance of why you felt they were important and what you're describing there?
Well, I had read a report by a man by the name of Mr. Banya, I believe he pronounced it.
Yes, sir.
He is, and looking at his credentials, he has a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and a bachelor's degree in computer science. And he made some rather strong statements and I believe misrepresentation of fact in his report.
Okay.
One of the reasons, for example, this photograph
Could
here,
you identify it by its letters on the back, sir?
CC, and I'd also reference W and X and Y and Z.
Could I slow you down? Can we take those individually and you could describe what you're seeing in them?
Okay. In his report, he made reference that, and he had,
Which exhibit would you like to start with?
let's start with CC.
Okay. And what is significant about CC, Doctor?
In the report of Mr. Benya, he had a photograph of the side alley light on, and he took measurements at the windshield of where he presented the Malibu car to be, and came to some conclusions about the conditions of lighting based on that.
Okay. Looking at CC, what are we looking at, Doctor?
That is one of the wigwag lights on a police car during the pursuit, leading up to sometime during the approximately 30 minutes that the pursuit was going on. That is a bright overhead light bar light, which is designed and purposely intended to get the attention of the motoring public who may be bystanders to see that there's emergency vehicles coming through, to grab attention and to be seen for a very long distance.
What's the next exhibit, Doctor, which you would like to reference?
Let's go to W.
What are we seeing in Defendant's Exhibit W?
That is a white overhead bar light. It's very bright. It is many, 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 many times brighter than the night sky around it. And it is something that I can tell you that if you were anywhere near that light, you would be blinded by the glare of that light.
Okay. Next exhibit, Doctor? And those are the things that you described earlier in your testimony.
Yes. Double A is similar, and Z, again, is similar.
Slow down.
Okay.
Is that double A on the
Yes.
monocoque board?
Yes.
And what are we seeing there?
Those are the wigwag lights. They oscillate between each other, sometimes coming on at the same time, but mostly oscillating between red, white, and blue on various police cars that would have been in the visual environment of the defendant while he was responding to this situation in the Malibu.
Okay. Next, Doctor.
Y. Again, here we have two units in tandem. You can see the wigwag effect on the vehicle on the left, and again you're getting the flash of the light on the right.
Okay. Next.
And X. So here at a distance way down, some distance down the street, this is the intended purpose of these lights, is to grab the attention of people who may not be paying otherwise attention to what's going on, that there's emergency vehicle activity in the environment. So these lights are not intended to help the vision of the person who's driving the car, the person who may be next to the car, but is to get the attention of somebody who may be inattentive driving down the street and there's an emergency situation going on.
Now, we've talked individually about things such as prolonged pursuit, strobe lights, effects of peripheral vision, muzzle flash, sighting a weapon, cracked windshield, saccades, blinded by the light, and excessive noise, correct?
Yes, did you mention the five phenomenon from the flashing of the lights?
I did not.
Okay, the five...
Why don't you articulate that to the judge first, and then I'll ask you
In psychology, there is a perceptual concept called the five phenomenon, and it is induced movement by the changing of lights. The simplest way to say is, I think everybody who may have been around in the 70s and remember disco balls and the flashing lights at discotheques, that when the light comes on, people change positions for where they would normally perceive to be because of the oscillation of light. In wigwag lights, you get this same effect because it induces the perception of movement. Is when lights come on in a pulsing manner and you get various views of the same environment, it can induce in our brain the perception of movement.
Okay. Taking all of those considerations that we had collectively, the number of things that we've just outlined, the muzzle flash, the strobe lights, the limitations of peripheral vision, sighting a weapon, cracked windshield, saccades, and the things that you've just described in addition to the noise. What effect does that have cumulatively on one's vision?
It decreases dramatically one's ability to see any significant detail or perception of color, and it diminishes peripheral vision and gives a central visual image that is without good color or detail vision.
Under those circumstances, Doctor, for example, there was already evidence that officers believed that they saw a firearm that wasn't recovered. You follow my question?
Yes.
Okay. Several officers' testimony that they saw a firearm or firearms in that blue Malibu under this combination of conditions that we've just discussed, and no firearm was recovered. Is that person a liar, or is there an opinion to a medical degree of certainty based on your degrees and your expertise that would explain that?
There would not have been anything that Officer Brelo could have seen at the terminal end of this pursuit to counteract the information that he had, that there had been given, that there had been shots fired from the car and a weapon in the car.
Would that apply to other officers as well?
Yes.
And when you say other information that's been given, you reviewed Officer Brelo's statement, correct?
Yes.
And what would be examples of that other information that's given?
That he was involved in a pursuit, there was radio communication that shots had been fired from the car.
And in reviewing Officer Brelo's statement, did you get an indication of what he said his emotional state was at the conclusion of that chase?
He was in a state of extreme fear for his safety.
Doctor, referring you back to your report, third to last page, if you will, you indicate a specific area of inquiry. I'm on the right page.
Is it the one that ends with my conclusion number one?
Yes, sir. Just above that. Middle of the page, specific areas of inquiry. And coasters. Sure. Okay. Just take a moment to look at that and refresh your recollection.
Yes.
Can you tell the court what your specific area of inquiry in your report was?
My specific inquiry was, is it reasonable to believe that a person, any person in Officer Brelo's circumstance,
What's the basis?
That's not his report.
The exact words?
The reasonable to believe, yeah.
Okay. It's, the objection's overruled.
You may answer, sir.
okay.
I believe you said reasonable believe. The prosecutor objected in your report. You said ability to visually discern.
Okay, well, to see that a human being, and by the way, most human beings of good health and good vision, there's very little variance in their vision. That's what we call a standard observer. And that a standard observer, so whether it's Officer Brelo or it's somebody else in his position, that they could have made the visual distinction to see whether a person was armed or unarmed in the vehicle in the last moments of the pursuit. And they didn't have anything that he could have seen that would have overridden what he had learned, that there had been a firearm in the car and it had been fired.
I don't want to get to your analysis yet. Was there another area of inquiry additionally?
Say again.
At the bottom of that paragraph, specific areas of inquiry regarding the peripheral vision of officers in the area.
Well, peripheral, because, well, under normal physiologic conditions, I explained how our central vision is paramount and peripheral vision is secondary. Under stressful situations, such as life-threatening situations such as this, central vision becomes extra emphasized in our visual awareness. So it would have been a tunnel vision type effect on the threat, and the perception of peripheral vision would be expected to be greatly diminished.
Okay. And could you just briefly describe your analysis of those specific areas of inquiry?
Such as the lighting? Is that what you're referring to?
Correct. You in your report then indicate that you have an analysis. I don't want you to read it all, but can you just, I know you've spoken of some of this collectively, can you just summarize your analysis of that specific area of inquiry?
My belief that there were overwhelming disabilities to Officer Brelo's ability as a human being to see inside the car at the conclusion of the pursuit. And these would have been brought about by, number one, it was during hours of darkness, and number two, it was most assuredly darker even yet inside the car because of the presence of a solid roof, which blocks any overhead lighting that would have come in directly from the lighting fixtures. There was a veiling glare repetitively very, very close to his eyes from the light bars on both 238 and 217. His point of focus would have been, after looking at the windshield and getting sight picture, it would have been maintained on his sight picture as opposed to inside the cab. There were the contradial fractures in the glass in addition to the holes, and the reflection of the light plus the light bar would be expected to be reflecting off the front surface of the windshield. There would have been the naturally occurring diminish of color perception because of the low lighting levels, and there would be less ability to perceive in the periphery and a greater accentuation on his attention in the top dead center in the line of his sight. Plus there is, as he moved and or he perceived movement in the car, whether it be from the people inside the car or because the stroboscopic effect of the light bar.
Let me stop you there.
Okay.
When you speak of him perceiving movement,
Yes.
it could be because there was movement.
Yes.
Is it reasonable that you could perceive movement under these circumstances when no movement actually occurred?
Yes.
Overruled.
Could you describe that? I believe you were before I so brutally
Well,
interrupted.
that goes
you.
back to what we call the 5 phenomenon, which is the induction of the appearance of movement from consecutive lighting, such as what would be there in the light bar. Because the light bar, not only when he was in the parking lot was there a non-stop high-intensity light flashing in his eyes, these lights had been to some degree on during the approximately 30 minutes of the pursuit.
Doctor, is there a neurological condition or traumatic events contained in your report? I know you told me how to say it.
Tachypsychia?
That's it. Can you describe that for the court?
That can happen as a change in the perception of time and movement during traumatic events. And it's not just police officer involved shootings, it could be pilots flying planes, and people in automobile crashes, surgeons having a catastrophe in the operating room, that there is a warpage of the perception of time. And it can either be speeded up or it can be slowed down.
Now, you don't specifically say that that occurred here, correct?
No, I
But
don't.
that is a phenomenon or well-accepted situation.
It's a well documented that it happens, and sometimes it doesn't happen.
Okay. Some people perceive things that took 10 seconds to have taken minutes,
Correct.
and some people perceive that same event that took 10 seconds to have taken 1 second.
That's correct.
That's what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. And are there any accompanying phenomena to that? Is indicated in your report?
That usually these traumatic events are, as far as vision is concerned, related to occur with tunnel vision. That there is a central fixation that excludes peripheral events.
Can I have a moment, Judge? Sure. And the opinions, again, that you've given us here today, they're to a reasonable degree of scientific medical certainty in your field, correct?
That is correct.
Doctor, thank you very much for your time. Judge, I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Shaughnessy. Before the cross-exam, let's take a break. So, sir, you remain under oath and obligated to return to the stand in about, I'd say, 15 minutes. We'll say 2:35. Thank you. We're off the record.